Hello, my name is Sam Lavine, and I'm a sophomore research fellow for the Civil War Institute at Gettysburg College. Today, I'm with Dennis Frye, one of our tour guides for the upcoming 2023 Civil War Institute Summer Conference, and we'll be talking about his John Brown to Stonewall Jackson Harper's Ferry tour. I'd like to give you a warm welcome, Mr. Frye, and thank you for being here with me today.
Yeah, great to be with you, Sam. Thanks so much for the invitation. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So before we get into your tour a little bit, I think we'd give a brief introduction to you and kind of your connection to the Civil War Institute Summer Conference and how long you've been working with CWI and its programs.
It goes way back. I go back to probably one of the very earliest years, sometime in the 1980s, mid 1980s. Dr. Gabor Bort at Gettysburg College had initiated the Institute. And I think the second year of the program, I was one of his featured speakers and guides. I remember we came to Antietam and we had, I think, six busloads of people in Antietam. So I had to find five other guides in addition to myself. That was a lot of people. I mean, we had about 300 people all touring at once at the Antietam battlefield. And so, Dr. Bort invited me back year after year after year. And I worked a lot with Edwin C. Bars. Bars was a premier guide, of course, just recently passed away, but was renowned in the Civil War. He was a good friend of the Institute, great friend of the Institute. And many people made friends with Ed and got to know Ed through the Institute. Ed was always very approachable, reachable, personable, and many good friends came out of that for Ed Bars and those that attended. So it was a privilege for me to be assigned to work with Ed as his partner. He would have a bus, I would have a bus, and we went all over the place to Eastern Theater battlefields. It wasn't just local. And so I have many fine memories of the Institute over the last 40 years. And it's really great to still be associated with Pete and the folks that have continued the great tradition of the Gettysburg Civil War Institute.
Yeah, well, thank you. We're glad to keep having you back. So one of the things that makes you so special to be our Harper's Ferry tour guide is that I believe you spent your entire career there as a park ranger for the National Park Service, and you were part of the project to move John Brown's fort back to its original location. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that project and how it came to be.
Well, a couple of things. Yeah, I did have most of my professional career was at Harper's Ferry National Park. I started as a park ranger. I became a supervisory ranger, supervisory historian, and then chief historian, and spent 20 years as chief historian. And most of the rangers in the national park worked for me. We had a very large interpretation and education program at Harper's Ferry. I had quite a number of students, intern students from Gettysburg College, several dozen over the years that came to Harper's Ferry to work in our program, and they did terrific work for us. Some of them are today permanent employees of the National Park Service, and always think that we helped get them started at Harper's Ferry National Park. So John Brown's fort actually has been moved four times from its original location. I won't go through all those times, but the last time that it moved was in 1968. I'm not that old. I was a very young kid in 1968 and did not even witness the moving of the John Brown Fort from Storer College grounds to its current location. But what I had hoped to do was move it back to its final home. And that never got done. I got real close. I almost had it in place to make that happen. Then when park changed superintendents, and as a result, the new superintendent decided that that was not a project, it was a priority. So it didn't happen. But that was always one of my goals, was to return the John Brown Fort to its original location. It's still not home yet.
So continuing on with Harper's Ferry, we're zooming in on just a speck in the history of Harper's Ferry. It covers more than 200 years as part of your interpretation of that region. I wonder if you could help us set the stage a little bit for your tour. How is Harper's Ferry important in the lead up to the Civil War, and how does it fit in the context of the early American Civil War?
Well, Harper's Ferry was a target of George Washington. In fact, I often would begin tours by asking my visitors, pull out a dollar bill. Just pull out a dollar bill. How many of you have a dollar bill? And most people would pull out a dollar bill, and I'd say, look at that dollar bill. and they look at it and there's Washington. And I'd say every time you pull out a dollar bill from now on, think George Washington and Harper's Ferry. And so
Hmm.
Washington was very instrumental in establishing a United States armory and arsenal at the ferry to produce weapons that would arm the United States military from about from Thomas Jefferson's administration all the way up until the Lincoln administration. So they manufactured small arms, rifles, and muskets at Harper's Ferry for about 60 years. Um, and that made Harper's Ferry a early target in the Civil War. In fact, it became the earliest target of Virginia. When Virginia finally decided to secede after Fort Sumter and after President Lincoln had called for troops to squash the rebellion, Virginia determined that it could no longer remain in the Union. And less than 24 hours later, a Virginia militia were on their way to take the Harper's Ferry Armory and Arsenal. Um, just before they got there, the arsenal was blown up by retreating federal forces, but they did take the armory. And eventually, Thomas Jonathan Jackson was assigned his very first command of the Civil War. T.J. Jackson, not yet Stonewall, no Bull Run
Hmm.
yet. Jackson's first command of the Civil War was at Harper's Ferry. And so one of his assignments was to move all the machinery that produced weapons south because Harper's Ferry, they knew it was too far to the north. It was on the border between the United States and Confederate States. And so Jackson took all that machinery that produced those weapons and moved it to Richmond. And then later, some of it was moved to Fayetteville, North Carolina. And the Confederacy continued to make guns, small arms, with Harper's Ferry weapons throughout the war. One final thing about Harper's Ferry. Jackson was assigned there early because that was truly the border. When Virginia seceded, the Potomac River, I want everybody to understand this, the Potomac
Hmm.
River became an international boundary. An international boundary. You would need a passport to go from one country to the next, to go from Virginia to Maryland.
Wow.
They're not the same nation. They're
Hmm.
two foreign countries. So Jackson is in command of this new fledgling Confederate States of America, and he's right on the border. And so, because Harper's Ferry is such a border location, it became an early target of the United States Army. Just like Bull Run, Manassas Junction, Harper's Ferry became a simultaneous target. And when we think of the first invasion of the South by the United States, that occurs in the Shenandoah Valley, and then, of course, in the area just to the north of Manassas. And so, yeah, Harper's Ferry became contested throughout all 4 years of the war. It would change hands 8 times during the war. The repeated invasions of the North in 62, 63, 64 all involved Harper's Ferry, seriously involved Harper's Ferry. Harper's Ferry helped create the Battle of Antietam. There would have been no battle at Antietam without what was happening as a precursor at Harper's Ferry. Massive
Hmm.
fortifications built at Harper's Ferry because after Antietam, Harper's Ferry became an extension of the fortifications of Washington. So you need to think of that's the first line of defense is Harper's Ferry to protect the nation's capital. So it was heavily engaged. There were tens of thousands of Union soldiers stationed there throughout the war. It was an occupied town. Martial law was the rule of the day. No civilian had any say in what happened from the day to day. And you never knew what flag you were going to see flying over your town from day to day.
So you talk about Jackson and Harper's Ferry being part of the defenses of Washington, D.C. How does Harper's Ferry and it changing hands, being such a contested point, how does that affect how Stonewall Jackson operates in the Shenandoah Valley, which very much becomes his area of operations during the Civil War?
Well, Stonewall Jackson, the Shenandoah Valley campaign is often considered his most brilliant exploit of the American Civil War. There was one failure that no one talks about, and that was at Harper's Ferry. Jackson successfully threw the Yankees out of the entire Shenandoah Valley, with the exception of one place, Harper's Ferry, and he didn't
Mm-hmm.
dislodge them at Harper's Ferry. So he failed. And in fact, it almost resulted in the capture of his army. He spent so much time in Harper's Ferry that when he finally learned that there were Union forces conducting a pincher movement far to his rear, he got out of there. He beat it out of there as fast as he could. And it actually resulted in some of the longest marches that the Confederate Army would take during the war to try to escape the pincer movement was coming in from the rear, but it was because he was at Harper's Ferry trying to get all the Yankees out of the Shenandoah Valley. Didn't succeed. But Jackson, because he was assigned to Harper's Ferry early in the war, knew it very well. He knew the topography. And this is the reason that General Lee would choose Jackson to return to Harper's Ferry during the first major invasion of the North in September 1862. And Jackson would become the principal commander during the Battle of Harper's Ferry in September that would precede Antietam.
So, talking about the tour coming up this summer, for people who might be hoping to go with you down to Harper's Ferry, what should they expect to hear about on your tour, and what do you hope that visitors coming with you get out of your experience at Harper's Ferry?
Well, first thing is this: Harper's Ferry is magical because if there was no history at all, people would come to Harper's Ferry because it is gloriously gorgeous.
Mm-hmm.
It is just absolutely stunningly beautiful, and that creates memories in their own right. And so it's photogenic. I'm hoping we have beautiful weather, but even if we don't, Harper's Ferry is pretty even in nasty weather. And so I'm always excited to share Harper's Ferry with people because of its beauty, and nobody ever goes home without that beauty embedded in their soul. And in the history, Harper's Ferry is a point of revolution. It's a point of revolution, and it's transformative. I mean, there actually are more revolutions that occur at Harper's Ferry than in Philadelphia or than in Williamsburg.
Wow.
The Industrial Revolution with the manufacturing of small arms, the very first place in the world where interchangeable parts are perfected is at Harper's Ferry, where you could take a part off the shelf and put it into something. You could never do that until that was perfected with weapons at Harper's Ferry.
Mm-hmm.
That was a revolution in industrialization. The transportation revolution, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, the very successful rail line in the United States, passes right through Harper's Ferry. Consider to go from Harper's Ferry to Baltimore before the railroad took 3.5 days one way, 70 miles, 3.5 days. Being a railroad, 3.5 hours. Transportation revolution. Harper's Ferry is in the heart of it. John Brown is a revolutionary. John Brown is seeking revolution. John Brown's revolution to terminate slavery in this country, to bring about the complete eradication of slavery, that was revolutionary. And Brown is a revolutionist. And so he targets Harper's Ferry and becomes forever associated with Harper's Ferry. Then the war. When you think about the Confederacy and secession, that's revolution. And for many Confederates, it was just a continuation of the first American Revolution. If you don't agree with your government, leave it. And so, the same heroes that were the United States heroes were the same heroes that the Southerners worshiped. Washington and Jefferson and Madison. And so, Harper's Ferry becomes the nexus of another revolution. And then finally, I'll add one that is probably the least known, but we've made a lot of progress in bringing this forward. African American history and the Civil Rights Revolution. During the war, Harper's Ferry becomes a mecca for those enslaved trying to escape slavery, because Harper's Ferry was behind Union lines much of the war. So here you had an outpost in Virginia, in the Confederacy, in a slave state, where African Americans freeing themselves could come and get shelter and protection. After the war, that resulted in the formation of a significant educational institution known as Storer College. And Storer College became its own mecca for former enslaved who came to get education so they could participate in teaching others how to participate wholly in a democracy. And then finally, Storer College became the meeting place for the Second Niagara Movement. Now, that's not well known in American history, but this was a meeting of the leading intellectual African Americans in the country in 1906. They came to Harper's Ferry. They were led by W.B. Du Bois. And while they're at Harper's Ferry, Du Bois issues an ultimatum, a speech, a manifesto, if you will, on civil rights that would have made Martin Luther King proud. He was 50 years ahead of King. but there's a direct link between the civil rights movement, the NAACP, Harper's Ferry, W.B. Du Bois, that speech, and then King in the 1950s. And so, again, part of a revolution. So Harper's Ferry is transformative in American history, not known for one event, but so many events that changed all of us and helped make us what we are today.
I think that sets the stage for quite an exciting tour this summer. Before we go, I'd just like to say to anybody watching this interview, if you have any questions or need more information about CWI Summer Conference, you can find the details on our website. If you just Google Civil War Institute at Gettysburg College, you'll find all the information you need. Before we go, I'd like to say thank you once again to Dennis Frye for joining me here today. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and we can't wait to see you this summer.
Thank you, Sam. One thing about any program that I give, you'll feel my passion. You'll feel my passion for history. You know, Harper's Ferry is my home. I grew up there. So anybody that comes and joins me for this program, I am literally sharing my own backyard with you.
Well, I'm sure we'll have many queuing up to be on your tour. Thank you again so much.
Great. Thank you, Sam. Pleasure.